Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. The topic for this webinar is the value proposition for energy storage at the Sterling Municipal Light Department. This webinar is presented by the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, also known as ESTEP. ESTEP is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy and Sandia National Laboratories and is managed by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA. Our host for this webinar is CESA Project Director Todd Olinsky-Paul, and I will pass it over to him to get this webinar started.
Thank you, Samantha. Welcome everybody to the webinar. We have a really great webinar today with a lot of very good presenters who were key to getting this project developed. So I'm sure everybody's very interested to get to that. Before we do that, I just need to give a little bit of background information about CESA and ESTEP for context, and then I will introduce the speakers and we'll go right into the main content of the webinar. So I want to start out by thanking Dr. Imre Zsuk of the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, who funds our energy storage program, and Dan Borneo, who's from Sandia National Laboratories, with whom we have a contract to do this work. ESTEP is the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, and just to give a little bit of information about that, ESTEP is conducted by CESA under contract with Sandia National Laboratories. We work with states and municipalities all over the country and with DOE, and the idea is to bring the states and municipalities into a collaborative effort with DOE and the National Lab to produce or develop energy storage projects. And you can see the map. We are engaged with states all over the country on projects. In some cases, we're engaged with them on policy development, and we also are able to provide technical assistance to some of them. And so this is quite a wide-ranging project. And if you want more information, there is a web page for it. Next slide, please. And I think I have it. Here it is. This is just a screenshot from the ESTEP web page. But the reason I have this up is just to point out that there is a mailing list you can sign up to if you want to get notified about future webinars or reports or other things that we may be doing. There's a big green button there with a red circle around it. You go to our website, click on that, and put your name on the email list. Also on the left-hand menu where you see an arrow pointing to ESTEP webinars, that's where you'll find this webinar archived and all the other webinars that we've done that are there to be reviewed at your leisure. I'm going to introduce today's panelists. We have Dr. Zsuk, who is the Director of the Electrical Energy Storage Research Program at the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Electricity. And that is the office within DOE that supports the ESTEP project and has supported this Sterling Municipal Energy Storage Project with some added funding and technical support through Sandia National Laboratories. We also have with us Sean Hamilton, who is the General Manager of the Sterling Municipal Light Department and led the project, who has provided technical support to the project. And we have Rayburn, a distinguished member of the technical staff at Sandia National Laboratories, who conducted the economic analysis for this project.
Well, thank you for the introduction. And yes, I'm Imre Zsuk, and I direct the Energy Storage Research Program at the Office of Electricity at the Department of Energy. And this webinar is about the project in Sterling, and specifically it is about developing the value proposition through this grid scale validation. On a fine day in October in 2016, these people got together with their shovels and started digging. And 3 months later, in a considerably colder climate, the facility was finished. the Sterling Municipal Light Department project on energy storage. The department had received a $1.5 million grant from the Massachusetts Community Clean Energy Resiliency Initiative, which is run by the Department of Energy Resources, and received additional funding from the Department of Energy through Sandia and from the Clean Energy Group. Now, the idea there was to produce a 2 megawatt, 2-hour storage facility to be joined with an existing 3.4 megawatt PV facility in order to provide resiliency for the police headquarters and dispatch center. This is to be run on lithium-ion batteries, which were provided by NEC. And here is the police department, a pleasant little building. And here is the transformer station where the storage facility is being housed. Specifically, the Department of Energy is providing both funds and technical support through Sandia. The result of this is that we're ending up in a project of 2 megawatt and 3 megawatt hours. So what is this going to be good for? Well, first of all, there is resilience, which is to say backup for the police station, dispatch center, and by using the battery storage alone and supplying mission critical services at the police station, things could be kept running for, well, about 12 days, just on the battery. If you add solar to that, then it could be for as long as you please. But that's not the only thing. It will also be providing cost savings for reducing the transmission capacity, in other words, cutting the monthly peak. It will produce revenues from capacity charges to the independent system operator, that's the yearly peak. It may produce arbitrage and frequency regulation benefits. And finally, it will integrate the intermittent PV. Well, we not only want to provide resilience, we actually want to make the microgrid pay for itself. And this can be done using an approach which we developed in a different project with Green Mountain Power in Rutland, Vermont. And at Sandia, they have studied the benefit structure and come up with a list of benefits and quantifiable benefits for these various functions. And as you can see, you have arbitrage, you have the reduced monthly peak, you have the reduced yearly peak, and you have frequency regulation. And all of these have very substantial benefits. This was the study by Rayburn, and he's going to be talking later in this webinar. This chart here is based on a 1 megawatt, 1 hour device, and basically this is going to be, the benefits are going to be twice as big. The result is that for a capital cost of $1.7 million per megawatt, the simple payback will turn out to be about 6.7 years. That is not counting the amounts of funding supplied by the various agencies. This is how the project would receive payback just on its own. Now, how does this look practically? Well, the diagram down here is the record which Sean Hamilton and the Sterling Municipality put together. And this represents a day last December. And if you look at this little glitch here, or this little depression, that was when the monthly peak occurred. And at this monthly peak, the battery was well charged, and they basically provided everything the battery had in it. And this reduction in peak resulted in a savings of $16,900. And if you multiply that with 12, you get about $202,000 per year. Now, this, of course, means that you have to catch every monthly peak, and that's not always possible, but it should be possible to catch most of the monthly peaks. So far, Sterling has caught the December peak that you see here, the February peak, the March peak, and the April peak. So going along very nicely indeed. Now, there were some 11 projects in Massachusetts which received the same funding from the state. And all of these 11 projects in 11 municipalities had storage involved. Now, we cannot support each of these towns individually. So what we did is we put together a lessons learned document, an energy storage procurement guidance document for municipalities. Dan Borneo mostly wrote it, and it was published together with the Clean Energy States Alliance. And basically, it provides all the elements that should be included in the solicitation for procurement and installation of a battery energy storage project, which is designed to provide backup power during outages and facilitate timely cost recovery. And this is the document, and you can get it at the Sandia website. And the name of the report is SAND 2016-8544. So, the utilities has captured the first 4 peaks. The batteries are perfectly working. Everything is going online. And suitably, this has now received an award. And the project has the 2017 GTM Grid Edge Award. And we are all very proud of it because we all had our share in making this happen. And it's nice to have it recognized as a public award. Thank you very much, GTM. Now, we have other projects like that in the pipeline, clearly similar to some degree. We have a project in Eugene, Oregon with the Water and Energy Board. And again, that's a resiliency microgrid, 500 kW of storage together with 125 kW of PV and diesel gensets at 2 aggregated sites. We are doing a study with Cordova, Alaska on basically smoothing hydropower. We are working with Kona, Hawaii, and Nelha and Helco, establishing 100 kW, but this time 500 kWh, so 4 hours or 5 hours of batteries using vanadium batteries, and this is to enable more solar PV installation. And we are involved in a project with the Washington Clean Energy Fund, which deals with Orca Island and Opalco, and this provides 500 kW, 4 hours for resilience, and again, it is a vanadium system. So, in conclusion, as new technologies are developed, the cost of projects will go down, safety and reliability will increase. And with every successful project, the value proposition will continue to increase and more jobs will be created. Thank you. And now we will continue with Sean Hamilton, who will tell you about the actual installation in Sterling, Massachusetts.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Sean Hamilton from Sterling Municipal Light Department. Welcome to the discussion on our project. This has been a great project that started many years ago. I'm not going to go a lot into the value of the energy storage. I think Ray will, this next presentation will break it down a little further. I think that the big discussion I'd like to top off is the resiliency portion of the project, where it's very hard to put a value on the resiliency of what this project will provide. We've looked at this as being located right next to our police and dispatch center, and we looked at we can cover this police center for over 100 hours anyway. So to look at a project like this for 2.5 weeks, we feel very comfortable that we could do this. The smoothing and intimate resources, having so much solar in our system has is a blessing and a curse at a time. I've got some slides just ahead that will demonstrate that a little further. I think the rest of the thing that Ray will be covering a little bit more, that I won't go into detail on those. And here's a demonstration why. As Emmy just mentioned earlier, we were #1 in the country in 2013, and this is what started us looking down the path to solar has a way. It's not a couple of years ago. We had over 100 inches of snow, and during January and February, therefore making our solar not even available to us. And other times, during the peaking periods, it's not there because of storms, humidity, and what have you. So we've always, that was the idea behind this project, where we began back in 2012, 2013, looking into it originally. And I'll show you some of the reasons, the specifics why. This slide here is a very good example of why. If you look at the portion of the lowest graph here, that's indicator of what our load profile looks like. This is the exact load of Sterling on a particular day, March 11th, 2017. And on this particular day, the solar's working the way it should. Sun comes up, solar reduces the load, and around 4 or 5 o'clock, the load goes back up again, and we go into the nighttime. The one just above that are the two per day disappears. You can understand the gap we have in our load now, that we have to go into the market to purchase this energy at this time. So these kind of days that we're looking forward to storage. Here's a very good. This shows the true effect of what happens on the effects of what happens a thunderstorm during a peaking period. You can see the day, September 2nd, 2014. My memory serves me correctly, this was the second peak day of the year. It actually went back to July of that year, but this was a very high peak demand day for New England. And if you're looking at this at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you can see where the thunderstorm came through town, therefore taking our solar offline and putting us right in our peaking period at the worst possible time. This could have been very expensive to us and our ratepayers, had this been the peak day. But you can see what happens after 2 months, after 2 hours, the thunderstorm passes, we go back to normal. It really sets the thing that we had no control. You sit there and watch the weather, you watch the thunderstorms come, there's nothing you can do. And this next slide here demonstrates what the cost would have been at that time. Okay, that's good. WECMA, which is West Central Mass, in the top left-hand, third column over from the left. That's where we are. And you can see at 55 cents a kilowatt hour to purchase the energy during that period. It's pretty expensive when you're selling it for 12 to 13 cents. It's really not a good business model. These are the type of things that we were looking at and taking into consideration with the batteries that we feel could have a very good effect on our bottom line, to make sure that we have security in our system, making sure that the power supply is secure. This is where I wanted to speak to most of the project. This is right here was where I think some of our big savings came in on the project. If you look to the left, you can see the excavation of where we put the conduits. The first conduit group you see is where the main transformer that went, that feeds between the B, the pole or the reclose next. And the next group is where the auxiliary transformer. We did auxiliary project to be sure that we could monitor what this round trip efficiency is very important, but as is the parasitic load that any project or anything like this on your system can provide. So we do track it separately. Each one of those has is individually metered so that we may track that better. And one of the big savings that brought to this project and the speed of the project was that our line crew, our operations crew, did most of this work. We excavated, had an outside firm excavate and pour the original foundation for the battery energy storage system, but we also did the rest of the work with the conduits, the pads for the transformers, the pads for the installation of the inverters, pads, things like that. We're all done in-house. We're all done by our staff, and what you don't see here, and I don't have a slide for, is to the right of the back end of these pictures, there's another group of conduits that are going into our control station and our substation for remote control of the island mode and the reclosers and such control information. So there's a lot of things poured. It's nice and neat and very clean. But I just want to show you underneath it, and that's where I think a lot of the utilities like us, as a small municipal, we're allowed to be very quick and nimble and get these things done because we did all the work ourselves. And here you have with these same pads, if you can look to the front, it's obviously the transformer, the main transformer that's connected into the battery system or the inverter where the second to last white container is. And the transformer after that is the small auxiliary transformer that I mentioned on that small pad. You see the two gentlemen working, that's in the inverter where the 13.8 to 480 volts inverter changes the voltage from where we charge it from the 13.8 to 480, or when we receive it, whether it's the 480 out to our 13.8 system. And the last piece of equipment you see, that's the actual batteries. That container is actually 9.5 feet by 53 feet long. So if you look at the whole project, it really didn't take up a lot of space, for the benefit we get out of this project. The pole closest to you has the recloser on top. It gives us the control of the system. So it's actually separated from our substation. We're treating it like a lateral almost versus integrated into our bus bar, etc. So you can see it's a very simple, compact project. Next slide, please. Here's that same day that breaks out what happened on December 16th. We started this project, as we mentioned earlier. October 12th was the first shovel in the ground. To this day, on 12/16, that was actually 33 working days that we put into this project. And the result was that we had to operate, for those of you in the New England area, you probably remember, temperatures were, hovering around 0 or below with a wind chill factor of around 20 below. It was one of those solar, how our solar was working during that day. It was a bright sunny day, and we were able to take advantage of the solar during the day. At night, take advantage of the storage. We hope to continue this in the future, and where you see it ramp up to the left of that, where the savings was, where you see it ramp up a little bit there. We hope to shave that curve, that sudden surge into the above at night, that we can make that a little less incline, a little less steep. I think that's also be a good cost-saving measure in the future. This is one of this shows you, this gives you an overlay of what our project looks like. This is how we show that it's microgrid capable. The project has been, the red on the left-hand side, it indicates where our line is from the substation over to the dispatch center for the resiliency test. This allows us, there's a separate circuit, a direct circuit, and a circuit is just dedicated to this project in itself. We had the circuit there. We actually utilized it for this purpose, and as I speak, we're in the middle of testing it as we speak to feed the dispatch center live from the batteries right now. We've taken off the circuit, we've opened the main recloser, and we're putting it onto batteries. As I speak to you, it's taking place. To the right of that, you see the yellow line going back to our Wiles Road 2 megawatt solar array. we in the future we're putting communications in there to allow us to intermittently operate both between the solar and the batteries to charge if needed, or in the event of a disaster of any type, we could actually open some circuits between there and the relay and probably feed them with the solar and charge the batteries. So far we've been very happy with the output of the project. It's gone very well. It came up very quickly and worked very well with all the parties involved. This is the result of the work of a lot of people, and you'll see that in the next slide. But we were just awarded yesterday morning, as a matter of fact. SEPA gave us the top 10, #1 ranking in the country for storage watts per customer at 533 watts per customer, and this is kind of our reward to everyone. All those involved in this project. It went great. I think we started early in this project, and we've had good turnout, and I think this award was really nice. Received along with this award, we also received a Grid Edge Award from the Green Tech Media Award. That was really nice to receive. And you can see the list should be recognized, and from the commissioners, Dr. Mijuk is on this call. Sandia with their technical skills and helping us put the thing together for the RFP. From our engineers to Scott Reynolds, this work doesn't take place, and Todd Olinsky, Paul, the work that everyone done and made it so successful. So when you see a reward like we've received, or the ones we've gotten, all these names should be on it. They've all done a great job helping us get there. So I want to thank you for today, for listening to our project, and have a great day.
Thanks, Sean. So Ray, I'm going to hand it.
All right, so today this is an outline of the talk. We're going to start by going over some of the potential value streams to Sterling, and then we're going to talk about how we look at revenue maximization, and then finally I'm going to talk about some results. So as Sean had mentioned, load and reduction in capacity payments and for primary benefit to Sterling. We also frequency regulation fleet, then was formulated as an optimization problem. We'll look at historical data, and I'll talk. Okay, so energy arbitrage. This is much the first value stream that people think about with energy. It's been proposed for a long time. It's pretty simple. You just buy low and sell high, and there's two plots in Sterling, and one on the left is from July of 2016. You have a peak late in the afternoon, early evening when people get home from work, and then there's another one March 23rd of this year where you also have a peak in the morning, and then you also have a peak in the evening. So typically in most energy markets, there's one, maybe two peaks a day. So with arbitrage, you charge hours where prices are high. There's several this. The most common one that we look at is that you procure the energy in the day-ahead market, and then you sell the energy in the day-ahead market. So you would pretty much lock yourself in a day ahead of what you're going to do. Another way to do this, if there's a lot of volatility in the real-time market, you can buy in the day-ahead market and then sell in the real-time market. And then yet another approach is you charge with renewables and then sell in the day-ahead market. And we didn't consider this for Sterling, but because they do have solar, they do have the opportunity to do this, and it makes the returns even better just because usually the renewable price is very low. But one thing that not everyone's aware of is you have to overcome the efficiency losses in the battery system. So if you have an 85% efficient system, you need at least about 20% swing in prices just to break even. So in some areas, you don't have much price swing, and arbitrage doesn't really pan out. And for what we've seen in most market areas, typically frequency regulation provides more revenue than arbitrage. The next benefit was reductions in your monthly network load payments. So ISO New England employs a regional network services payment for use of pool transmission facilities to move electricity in or within the New England Balancing Authority. So this table here just shows the price for the R&S payments. And you'll note back in 2007, it was about $26 a kilowatt year, which comes out to about $2,000 a megawatt month. And by the time we hit 2016, it was up to $104 per kilowatt year. So these prices have actually gone up quite a bit over the last 10 years. And as shown, you monthly load during that one peak hour. So using the $104 pricing, reducing your load by 2 megawatts gives you about a $208,000 a year potential benefit. And the next value stream was the forward capacity market payments. So ISO New England has a forward capacity market to incentivize generation to be built because just electricity markets alone don't provide enough financial incentives. And the way this is paid for is you have to pay into the market based on what your peak load is in the 1 hour, one peak load hour of the year. And so this table shows the prices, and they started out around $2, $3, $4 a kilowatt month, but they've gone up for 2017, 2018 up to $7 to $9 a kilowatt month. These prices are set a couple years in advance through auctions, so you actually know what the prices will be a couple years out. But just using 2016 data, 2 megawatt resilience is one of the main reasons this project was started, and it's really the benefit of backup power or value, or you're looking for what the value of lost load is. And so the value of lost load is defined as the average cost to customers per megawatt hour of unserved load when they're disconnected during involuntary load shedding. So there are two ways people try to value of lost load. One is using market prices, and the other is using surveys. So for this study, we relied on some surveys. But one of the problems with the literature is there isn't much literature out there for backup power for first responders. So the category that we had to use was public administration, small commercial, and industrial. And that probably understates the value to Sterling, just because once you get first responders involved, like police and dispatch center, you know, if there's a severe winter storm and the energy storage enables the police to respond to something where they wouldn't have been able to respond before, you know, there's a chance you might save a life, and then that gets to be a pretty high value. And then the last benefit is frequency regulation. So frequency regulations and ancillary service used to maintain grid frequency. Different markets have different implementations. Cal ISO break it up into regulation up and regulation down, so it's two separate markets, one for each direction. Other places it's a bidirectional, so they assume you can go both ways, and ISO New England is one of those. So the way this works, there's an automatic generation signal sent every 2 to 4 seconds to generators or devices that are signed up for frequency regulation. Per quarter 755 got everyone on pay for performance. So now there's typically a performance score and a mileage payment used to calculate how much you get, how much they've basically taken a high pass filter and send a high frequency content to fast devices like energy storage, and then they get compensated more for providing more benefit. And the plot on the bottom right just shows a typical AGC signal. So this chart just summarizes the approach we take to looking at maximizing revenue in market areas. So step one is you have to go look at the market rules and figure out, you know, how energy storage can participate. Then the next step is to take historical data and run an optimization and look, you know, several years of data and see what the optimization gives you. And sometimes there's only one potential revenue stream. In that case, you're almost done. The optimal policy is pretty easy. You just do that activity all the time. And in many cases, that's frequency regulation. ISO New England and Sterling are a little unique in that you have multiple revenue streams that are kind of on the same order of magnitude. So the next step is develop a forecasting scheme and then do some back testing. And then once you've got that implemented, you can get a much better estimate of your future potential revenue. So the model that we use for the energy storage device is relatively simple. First, we assume that the device is small relative to the rest of the market, so it's a price taker. If you install a really big energy storage system, you have to start worrying about impacting market prices. Then you have to do more complicated analysis called production cost modeling, where you look at the whole generation stack for the region. We typically use 1 hour data, but if a market uses, say, 15-minute data, we'll use whatever the market rules are. But for arbitrage, the model is very straightforward. It's just the state of charge at your current time step is the state of charge at your previous time step times the storage efficiency, which is the losses you have over one period. And then you add in the amount that you recharge during that period. And we multiply by gamma C on the charge side. So if you charged a megawatt hour, you don't get that full amount into the state of charge because of the losses. You can actually model that on both sides, going in and going out. They're fully equivalent. We just model it this way. So the state of charge is always actually your available state of charge. And then you just subtract off the quantity discharged, which is QD. And that's how you calculate the state of charge at each time step. And then you've got some constraints associated with that. You can never go over the maximum capacity of the device. And then you can also never go below 0 for state of charge. And then there's limits on the maximum amount you can charge and discharge in a period. So when we do arbitrage and regulation together, we just add a few more terms to the model. So if you look to the kind of right side of the equation, there's the first term, the QT reg is the amount of regulation that you've been assigned. And then gamma RD is the fraction of regulation that's regulation down. And then gamma C is just the conversion efficiency. So if you're providing regulation down, you're charging basically. And then because you're charging, you use the conversion efficiency to reduce the amount you actually bump the state of charge. And then on the regulation, where we're providing regulation up, you've got gamma RU, which is just the fraction of regulation up bid called, times the quantity that was assigned to you. And then similarly, you have constraints on state of charge. But one thing that we do, so we do these optimizations assuming perfect knowledge. So that's the best possible case. But we do make it conservative. If you bid in the regulation market, we assume, even though we know what's going to happen, we make the assumption that you have to be able to handle any possible contingency. So your state of charge has to be within limits so that for the whole. So the red arrow just points to the constraint that handles that. So your state of charge has to be at least the amount that you bid in the regulation market, and then it also has to be within reduced by the amount you bid in the regulation market for the upper bound as well, and that makes sure that you always have enough state of charge. And then so those two terms, gamma RD and gamma RU, that's the fraction that's actually called for regulation up and regulation down. So if you look at this plot, the light red area is the regulation up scheduled capacity. In this case, it's like 10 megawatts for an hour, so it's 10 megawatt hours. And then the dark red is the actual discharge that you were called upon to provide. You'll notice that the dark red, is really a small fraction of the light red. So in this case, it was only 15 to 20% of actually what you bid into the market and were assigned. And the same goes for regulation down. So the dark green is the actual charging, and the light green would have been if the amount that you were signed up to provide, the 10 megawatt hours. So typically, gamma RU and gamma RD, you can just use 20% as a guesstimate of what it is, and that's usually close enough. We've done sensitivity analysis to show what happens if you're off. It really doesn't affect the answer that much. If you're fortunate enough to be in an ISO that provides a second-by-second regulation signal, historically you can use that to calculate what these terms are for each hour and get a much better estimate. So when you start looking at including the regional network services and the forward capacity market in the optimization, it's the same exact model as arbitrage and regulation. You handle the additional revenue streams and the cost function. And it's possible to get a benefit from all three just using the same discharge quantity. So this slide talks about the different cost functions that you try to maximize. So the first one's the arbitrage cost function. So the first term, PT of D, is the price associated with discharging, and then CT of D is the price or is the cost associated with discharging, and then QT of D is the quantity discharged. For all the analysis, most of the analysis we do, we ignore the cost associated with discharging. That's a pretty active research area. Depending on how you treat a system, what type of signal it sees, the energy storage unit might last longer or might last a shorter amount of time. And we're working to how to incorporate the characteristics of the charge-discharge signal into the financial optimization. But for right now, for these results, we ignore the cost. And the next term, just when you recharge, you have to purchase electricity, and then you also have a cost associated with that. And then there's a discounting term, e to the minus RT, that you can use to take everything back to a certain date, discounting-wise. And for this analysis, we just assume that the interest rate is 0. Then when you add in frequency regulation, you add in another term associated the quantity regulation times the price for regulation. ISO New England actually has pay for performance, and as of March 31st, they changed the rules where they actually have a separate component for the mileage payment. Just to be consistent, since we span that date, all our analysis, we just focus on the capacity payment. So these numbers are a little low for regulation. There's a little bit more revenue out there. And then for arbitrage plus frequency regulation plus the cost regulation and arbitrage, you just update the prices to include the benefits associated with the forward capacity market and the regional network services. So to do this analysis, we pulled data from the ISO New England website using the RESTful Services API. And this is really great. I've pulled data from several different ISOs, and ISO New England is my favorite. It's a great interface, and the advantage is that you can get exactly the data you need, and then you can save it in a nice format that works for you. So we use a MATLAB script to pull the data off and then put it in Excel files, and it makes it easier for us to do the analysis. Then as far as the optimization software, we use Pyomo. It's a high-level optimization framework developed by Sandia, and that's the Pyomo website. It's also available from the Sandia website as well. And then we're just using an open source solver, GLPK, which is free to do the solving. And it's a linear program for this optimization, so it's no big deal. Other options, originally we started doing this in MATLAB. You can do it in MATLAB. It's a little more tedious, just the way you have to enter in the cost functions and the constraints. There are other high if you buy a third-party library to do optimization, I have done small like toy problems, just like for 24 hours in Excel, and you don't really have enough capability even to do the small problems. So if you do the Excel route, you need to purchase a third-party optimization library. And then there are other optimization languages out there. You can also do production cost modeling if you have the tools to do that, although that's overkill given the price of a lot of production cost modeling tools. So here are some results. So what we do is we look at multiple years of historical data. This goes from 2010 to 2015, and we sweep the power ratings. In this case, we're going from 0.25 megawatts to 2 megawatts. And then this is for a 4 megawatt-hour system. We typically do it for different size systems. And so the column on the right would be 2 megawatt, 4 megawatt-hour, which is pretty close to what the Sterling system is. They're 2 megawatt, 3.9 megawatt-hour system. And so you can see it, it bounces around year to year. It's around $40,000 average over the course of the last 5-year period. And then once you throw in frequency regulation, the potential revenue goes up significantly. And you also notice that the revenue was increasing over the last few years from $200,000 to $400,000 in 2015. So this chart, it just shows more of the data. So this is the full sweep for 2015. And the red circle shows the size of the Sterling system, which is 2 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour. You'll notice there's a knee in the curve, and that knee in the curve is just from frequency regulation. You want your capacity to be roughly twice what your power rating is, so you can hang out at 50% state of charge and then bid in full amount into the frequency regulation market. Then once you add in the regional network service and forward capacity market, the revenue goes up even more. In previous presentations, we quoted the RNS and forward capacity market benefits separately. For these results, it was done in one optimization, but they're pretty much independent activities because you're only doing the hitting the monthly and annual peaks, one or 2 days a month at max. So you can do the analysis separately and just add them together. But for 2015, there was about $680,000 in potential revenue for a system the size of Sterling's. So this slide shows the optimization results for a typical week. And so this is last week of July 2015, which happened to be when they had the monthly peak and the annual peak. So you'll notice that most of the time, if you go down the last chart, the state of charge, you spend most of your time roughly 50% state of charge, and then Q-reg, which is the second from the bottom, is the amount that you're bidding in the regulation market. So that's 2 megawatts, which is your full capacity. So the optimum policy is pretty much doing regulation all the time. And then right before when you think the peaks are going to occur, you stop doing regulation, you charge up to 100% state of charge. And then in this case, the forward capacity market peak occurred in the hour right before the RNS peak. So you discharge for 2 hours for the 2 peaks, and then after that you slowly build up your state of charge. If you look at the red chart, third one from the bottom, you can see the red discharge during the 2 peak hours, and then after that you build up your state of charge to 50%. You do this just is a zoom in of that same chart, or it's a little easier to see. So even though there's some pretty big peaks in the LMP price for energy, you don't really do regulation that much, or don't do arbitrage that often. There's some little blips in QC where you're charging, and there's one little blip in QD around 1600 hours, and that was just a little bit of arbitrage, but everything else, the optimal policy was to just do regulation all the time, and then the hour before, when the peak's going to happen, you charge up and hit the 2 peaks. So grid resilience, the way we've modeled that is we went through the literature and found some values for value of lost load, and usually that's a function of the time of lost, or the duration of the lost load. And so we did a curve fit and extrapolated out to different. 4 megawatt hour system can go for a very long time, about 16 days. So that'd be about $163,000 in potential benefit for each event. But that likely understates the value to Sterling just because they're involving first responders, and there's not a lot of information out there on resiliency for first responders and the value of it. So as far as hitting the peaks, this is a distribution of the monthly peaks from a 10-year period from 2003 to 2013. And as you can see, they're pretty spread out over a course of 5 or 6 hours. So having more capacity would give you the opportunity to discharge over more hours if your forecasting wasn't quite accurate, and increase your probability of hitting the peaks. And this chart is just a cumulative density function of the monthly peaks. So if you just picked 1 hour based on historical data, the best you could do is maybe have about a 25% chance or 30% chance of hitting that peak. But if you get up to 3 hours, you can have maybe a 60% chance just based on the past occurrence of those hours. It's a little better for the annual peaks. So the annual peaks over the last 16 years are distributed between 4 hours, and the one time it was in the 13th hour was back in 2000. So, and ever since then, it's mostly been bouncing back and forth between 15th, 16th, and 17th hour. 1 hour system, and every year you discharge in the 15th hour in the month that you thought was the correct month for the annual peak. You have about a 70% chance of hitting that hour. And this is the same plot showing the cumulative density function as a function of capacity. So, a 2 or 3 hour system can get 80 to 90% of the peaks just based on sheer luck and things staying the same as last time or last year. So future work, right now we're investigating algorithms for predicting the monthly and annual peaks. We think that's pretty much the biggest challenge in maximizing revenue in these types of applications. We also plan to release some Pyomo example code on the DOE Energy Storage website towards the end of 2017. So in summary, Arbitrage is more synergistic with the other peak shaving applications. And the original charter from Sterling was to focus on arbitrage, R&S payments, and port capacity market obligations, and then also grid resiliency. But if you just look at these 3 revenue streams for 1 megawatt, 1 megawatt hour system, you're looking at about $250,000 in potential revenue per year. If the capital cost for a 1 megawatt hour system are about 1.7 million, that simple payback is about 6.5, 7 years by dividing 1.7 million divided by 255,000. So, all right, that's it for me, Todd. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ray. We have a lot of questions, and I want to just start by clarifying something. Can you just back your slides up to where you showed the one with the blue bars for the monthly distribution, the distribution of monthly peaks? That's okay. Yeah. So just to clarify something on this, this seems to show that the monthly peaks are kind of all over the place hourly. I'm curious whether this was sorted at all by month or by season. In other words, if you just looked at the spring peaks over the past 10 years, would it have been less scattered and more predictable?
I'm just starting to look at that, but in discussions with Sean has some thoughts on what seasons will be easier to hit versus harder to hit, and I think it's kind of along the lines of what you're talking about, so we'll see what Sean.
Shifts in daylight, shifts in peak temperature. Winter would be very different from summer. So if you segregated them the way that the municipal utility would kind of look at it would be, okay, we're in the winter now, that we're expecting peaks around this time of day. Might be useful to do.
Yeah, and I've had some discussions with Sean, and I think from his perspective, maybe the summer and winter will be easier, but like the shoulder months and the spring and fall might be much harder to figure out.
And that's consistent with what we've heard from Green Mountain Power as well in Vermont, and they have a similar economic approach or business plan, that the shoulder months are a little harder to predict. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of questions. I'll start with some questions for Sean and then move into some questions for Ray. First question, what's the capacity factor of the battery, and how does it determine when to charge and discharge?
The capacity, the round trip efficiency, which is more what we're looking at, the round trip efficiency is 82%. Charge and discharge is pretty much set by what we want to program it. And each time of year will be different. If your off-peak rates are very low, and we'll be charging at night and obviously looking at the morning peak and the evening peak, or in the summertime during the afternoon peak. So it's going to vary according to the weather, the time, demand, and our load, because we do have load peak shaving available for our load that we may use this as part of that system.
Okay, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, they're asking whether how are you dispatching it? How does the battery get dispatched? How does it know when to charge it? Is that a sort of a manual switch that you're using, or is there some kind of automated control?
This is an automated control. We pre-program it to dispatch at a set time to dispatch, and then to stop at a certain time, and then in that time zone we'll add another time for it to start back up to recharge again, and then it stops when it's fully charged.
Okay, but you're doing the calculations. You're not relying on some algorithm to automatically tell it.
Correct.
Okay.
At this time, we are looking at different things right now.
Right.
But at this time, we're programming ourselves.
Okay. Another question on this project: what fire safety or protection steps were taken for the battery system, and was there any special training for the fire department?
The fire department was involved from the beginning. We put an AES full suppression system inside of the. There's a full suppression inside of the container, and it was actually pressure tested to make sure that there was no leaks at all. Fire department came down, did an inspection. We ran through all the alarms. It passed with flying colors. The fire suppression system was provided by NEC under their specifications, which met the fire department. We met ahead of time with the fire department, so this is what they were putting in, fully compliant with what they wanted to see, and so that was between the fire department and NEC, and it worked out very well. And the test went fine, and we've had no issues.
And that fire suppression system, that's internal inside the container, right, where the batteries are?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. I should also just point out with regard to that, I don't know if it was evident from the images, but it's the thing sits on a pad on a gravel area, and maybe you can just speak a little bit more to that in terms of where the thing is located and in terms of safety.
Yeah, as you can see, it's located right in the middle of our substation, away from our control house. The next thing is our neighbor, which is quite a ways away on the other side. We would have no, if in the event that this thing was to burn, which God forbid, but if it did, we wouldn't do anything with it. There's nothing. It's made to take care of itself. As a matter of fact, the alarms inside and the formula that's used for the fire extinguishing system inside will dissolve, and will take away what's needed and it's close to fire.
Okay, thank you. There's a questioner who is basically saying, well, he's suggesting that arbitrage might reduce the useful life of the system while providing not a whole lot of income, and maybe you should focus on what gets the best cost-benefit results. Can you speak to that? I'm sure you looked at that, and maybe Ray wants to speak to that as well. You obviously have to balance cost and benefit when you're talking about activities that require you to charge and discharge. You're cycling the battery on the life of the battery. At the same time, there's a benefit assessment, or is that just warranty on the system?
Primarily what we did is we looked at the arbitrage, same numbers, and we're working with Ray and Sandia. We looked at those numbers, and they're not great over the years. It's a very low revenue stream. So we don't see ourselves doing that unless opportunity presents itself, such as a couple weeks ago, the markets went negative for a little while. We plan to be able to take advantage of things like that. And that was exactly one of the reasons also why we didn't look at the frequency regulation market. We didn't want to keep discharging and recharging and, shorten the lifespan of the batteries. We thought if we can get the RNS, first the resiliency, the RNS, and, the capacity payments reduced, we think those three revenue sources are valuable enough to us that we don't have to continue to operate the batteries and reduce the lifespan. And Ray could probably comment more on the actual cost analysis of the arbitrage, because those are his numbers we work with.
Yeah, I agree with the person asking the question. It is something you have to consider. You know, there is a cost associated with different types of charge and discharge profiles, and one or the other might be better or worse for a typical system. And we are working towards incorporating that in our optimization approach. But right now, the cost term was zero, so it wasn't taken into account. But they bring up a very valid point.
Yeah. I don't know if this was included anywhere, and I didn't see it, but it would be interesting at some point to look at the cost benefit for each individual application of the battery. I mean, obviously, hitting the annual capacity peak is far and away the most benefit for the least cost, because you're using it for reducing 1 hour over the course of a year, and you're getting an enormous cost savings from that. And then the monthly peaks, which reduce cost, the regulation is third, but it'd be interesting to look at. Okay, somebody wants to know, again, they're talking about arbitrage. When doing arbitrage, is there capacity reserved for backup? I guess that means for the resiliency benefit. If so, how is the capacity reserved?
At this time, go ahead, Ray.
Oh, I was just going to say, so I should have mentioned in the presentation, the definition of resiliency that Sterling is using is a little different than a typical definition, and I'll let Sean explain it, but it's more along the lines of, you know, getting ready for a winter storm or something. Be able to, you know, charge up in advance and be ready for that storm or hurricane.
Yeah, that's correct. That's pretty much how we've looked at the resiliency portion of it. And the arbitrage portion, we're not just going to go after it to go after it. If it's there, we'll take advantage of it. Right now, we're just watching the markets and watching the day and nighttime markets, and it's just not there right now. It's not enough of a spread. Like Ray pointed out in his presentation, that you need at least a 20% differential to start even looking at it. And the market's been pretty flat lately.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is a question I'm sure you're going to love, Sean. It has to do with load reconstitution, and we might want to explain what that means. A lot of people probably aren't aware of it. But the question is, doesn't current policy in ISO New England require some of these savings to be reconstituted?
If you look at the way the ISO New England tariffs are written right now, you're required to register. It's the 2 minute on one circuit, so it's not required to be registered.
Okay, and that means?
That means that it's behind the meter. It's no different than any other load reducing thing, demand response thing that anyone else would use. Load reconstitution is in your Schedule 21 says may be reduced. How they go about doing them all, I don't know. That's something we're looking at. This is a behind the meter load reducer.
Right. Okay. So, in other words, it's behind the utilities meter, and the ISO doesn't see it, so to speak, unless it's 5 megawatts or larger, which this one isn't.
We receive no capacity payments or anything for this either. We receive no market benefits at all directly from ISO or any others for this either.
Right. Okay. So it's a cost savings device, or it's a cost savings application behind your meter that's similar to any other demand reduction measure that you might install.
Correct.
Okay. Another question, does the reduction of peaks have an effect on the ramp rates of power plants? For example, you showed a graph which had a sudden decrease. This would mean a power plant would have to turn off quickly and run at a lower part load, which could result in an increase in emissions. I have a feeling the answer to this is that your little battery there, well, it's not so little, but in the scheme of things, region, enough of them So can you
I can speak to that a little bit because one of the things we've looked at, we've talked about, and I think, and as we get more and more solar in New England, it's going to shift that peak to the right. If you look at California and you watch the, what they call the duck curve or the duckbill curve, and that used to just gradually increase at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Now it just shoots straight up. So it's at that moment they're going to be looking for people, or generators or what have you, to help soften the blow of that. And I think that's where the batteries take that in. So maybe you don't need that peaking unit. Maybe the battery does it instead of that peaking unit because they're much more efficient, quicker response, cleaner. So there's a lot of advantages to the batteries. There's also advantages to the peaker units. I think it's going to be a preference to who's ever doing it.
Yep. Let me just explain a little bit. When you look at the graph of the Sterling load and you see where it suddenly drops down because the battery kicks in and starts to discharge to reduce their peak, that's just, that steep decline there is for Sterling, not for the entire region. That would be a blip in the curve for the entire region of the New England ISO. So I don't think to turn on or off just due to Sterling's actions. It would just be for the region. And the other thing I want to point out was there is some in California some effort to put in place some kind of market for storage and other kinds of resources that could actually help to improve those steep ramps that you're describing from the duck curve. And that would be another potential market for energy storage if that were to happen in New England or elsewhere. So you could see at some point in the future maybe having some kind of a ramping market that you could bid into, which would be similar to other markets like frequency regulation, where you could make that system available to try to somewhat moderate those ramps. But we're not at that point yet in New England with the duck curve as extreme a ramping situation as they have in California, although it is heading in that direction. Okay, somebody else wants to learn about the control capabilities that delivered the peak demand reductions. Is this SW from NEC? What are the elements that delivered the reductions?
Primarily, what delivered the thing was the time that we set it to start and the time we set it to stop. We set the full discharge over a 2-hour period at 6 o'clock and turn off at 8 o'clock, what have you, at the timeline. So it has the capabilities of doing multiple things, and this was just one of the elements. It was just a timed thing. That's all it was. Certainly time to turn on, time to turn off.
Great. Somebody else wants to know what happened in January. It looks like there was or unexpected problem with the system or something else.
What it is as we installed the unit, we were commissioning, and we had got it up and operating in December. And as we were fine-tuning it, NEC was very good about finalizing. The batteries all met spec, but there was a couple, even though they were above spec and the technical specs we offered, they were just a little below 100%, and they wanted to change those out to get this thing to 100%. And in doing that, when you change a battery, it's not like a flashlight. You take the 2 batteries out, put the new ones in, the flashlight goes. There's a time delay that has to almost balance. It was during that period that the system was balancing that the peak was hitting. And we opted not to come out of that because it was early enough at the time, and we said we got time enough that we feel there'll be another peak, and it just never happened. That's all. There's a timing issue. That's solved now because the batteries are all 100%.
Great. And one more question, and I'm going to skip over to some questions for Ray. What was the average load and peak load at the police station and before the system was installed, and what were the parameters that determined the sizing of the battery?
So we just assumed a 10 kilowatt load, and I don't know if it's changed or not since they've installed the battery, but that was the assumption for the calculations.
Todd, I can add to that. It's got a 21 peak demand load down there in the building. We assumed during a severe storm or something of that magnitude that we could reduce, whether it's copiers, the air conditioner, the units could be shut down to extend the life of the batteries. We assumed we could at least cut the load in half. Averages around 14, 16. We felt comfortable we could get rid of 4 to 6 kW if we had to in the event of emergency. So we used
resiliency benefit is you can support that load for what, 12 days?
Yes, yeah. And,
okay.
Yeah.
And that's assuming, I mean, that would be extended if you could if you're recharging with solar, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you've got at least 12 days of backup power for the police station.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I want to jump over to some questions for Ray. Does Sandia maintain the optimization data sets and offer them for analysis by other entities?
Right now we don't. I just use publicly available market data. So the data itself is available if you just go to the ISO of interest and get it yourself. We are in the process of getting a copyright on some of our scripts and plan to put them on our Sandia website. We're still not sure if we'll be able to include data sets just because it's not our data. We're getting it from an ISO.
Great. I'm not sure you have the answer to this question yet, but the question is, based on performance to date, what's the ratio between actual revenue captured versus theoretical maximum revenue based on perfect foresight? I'm going to interpret that for the audience. How well is actual economics doing compared to your modeling predictions?
Well, first I'll defer to Sean on the actual performance, but just at the theoretical, we've done some analysis with Arbitrage for ERCOT and a few other areas where you can get maybe 85% of the maximum potential value out of Arbitrage with some relatively simple forecasting. And then when you're in a situation where frequency regulation is the optimal policy, you're really pretty lucky because all you have to do is do frequency regulation all the time, and you can get 95, 96% of that theoretical maximum. ISO New England is a little different with these peak shaving for the monthly and annual peaks, and so I think Sean might have a better feel for how many peaks he thinks he can hit.
We've set a target of hitting 8 out of the 12 monthly. We assume that the annual and that monthly peak will coincide, or they will coincide. So those are our targets right now. That's what we're looking at. Some things may change, an extra colder October, or something crazy in September. You never know. August, July, pretty predictable for the overall peaks, but. It's going to be very hard. We're on a learning curve. We're looking at data going back almost 20, 30 years, as far back as we can get stuff, and trying to make predictions. But we're also watching the peak shift to the right because of the solar. So there's a lot going on.
Yep. Here's another question that has to do with modeling versus reality. Can there be a situation when frequency regulation signals prevent you from discharging during the peaks that you're trying to hit?
Yes, and right now that's one of the reasons we are not in the frequency regulation market. We have not registered it. We are not in the frequency regulation market because it really wasn't. It's developing. In ISO New England, it's a developing market, and we're looking at everything. But we started this project at a time when some of these are available. We'll sit back and assess, but the primary thing is to our peaks. That's for sure. And resiliency, of course.
Okay. I think this question is for Ray. Does the payback model consider labor that was performed by the town's employees? I guess she's referring to the Sterling linemen that helped to do some of the installation work.
I can add to that, Ray, if you want. Our all-in cost for everything, every possible nickel we spent on this project went into it. from the labor to the clips to the foam to fill the conduit to the, everything we put in was put into this project. We did add all cost in. So yes, that labor was figured our part on the numbers that we gave to others in the price of the project.
Yeah, and everything I do, I primarily focus on revenue just because that's publicly available information, and cost data is usually proprietary or hard to come by. So none of my analysis incorporates any of the cost side, whether it be associated with wear and tear of the system or the capital cost.
Okay. Another question for Ray. This is a little long. The slide on the VOLL, which has to do with the value of lost load, seemed to show a benefit of $160,000 a year, assuming that the system could supply 16 days worth of backup power. Was the full $160,000 rolled into the financials for the system? Since actually having a day of outage is
correct. So yeah, I think the per year. So yes, they're making a correct statement. So if you actually wanted to look at like the value per year, you'd have to multiply that by the probability of it happening per year. So I agree with what they're saying.
Yeah.
I have to agree with that too. We did this project without even putting a dollar value on that. It was never figured into the revenue, the revenue of the project or the ROI or anything. It was just was hard to put a value. You may put one on there, but I don't know if you can, like you said.
Yeah, I mean that's a really open question in general with resiliency, and the problem is, and I went back and looked at the value of lost load research that those values were based on that Ray used, and those are really based on lost load at a commercial industrial type of facility, and they're very, very general numbers. I mean, they're not specific to what you have here. Is a system that allows you to continue to provide emergency dispatch to first responders in case of an emergency, and to the police station, overall. So, what is the value of that if you're in the middle, somebody's life is saved because you're able to responders? It's hard to, I don't think anyone's done that yet in terms of assigning those kinds of values. It's probably something the insurance industry, if anything, would be able to come up with. But it's certainly going to be different from a commercial industrial site that loses power for an hour and you just, base the value of that on whatever, revenues were lost. So it is a very rough estimate. I would tend to think that it's, if anything, it's undervalued in Ray's analysis for the reasons that I just talked about. And Ray, do you have anything you wanted to? Am I capturing that correctly?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's all the literature is just generic commercial industrial value of lost load. And this is different because it's first responders, and I couldn't find anything in publications talking about that. So I think we are understating it, and the values on slide 24 are per outage. So then if you want to assign a value for a year, you'd have to multiply that times the probability of an outage. So, if it's 10% probability of an outage and you assigned it $160,000, it's like a $16,000 potential benefit.
Okay, thank you. Somebody wants to know, does the annual peak get set by the ISO or is it your annual peak? I think we just need to clarify this when we talk about peaks. What you're doing is you're reducing Sterling's demand during the peak for the entire New England region.
Correct. During the peak, that annual, the peak, that sets your capacity. You're therefore lower your capacity obligation, what you would have to pay to own that capacity, and that's where the value comes in.
Yep. Okay. Here's an interesting question. Was a flow battery considered for longer duration applications, or would it be if you needed it, for example, either for, I suppose, the resiliency or for some other application? And I don't know if Emery's still on, if he wants to speak to that, because as you know, we've seen most of these projects have been lithium ion, but that's not the only it's not the only chemistry on the market. So did you guys look at flow batteries, or did anyone propose a flow battery?
Yes, we did. Yes to both questions. We did. No one proposed one during the RFP process, but we did look at flow batteries. The problem we ran into is they take up more. It was the size of the project. The footprint that they needed was much bigger than we had available. We even looked at alternative sites near the substation or other areas that just did not work out.
Okay. And here's this may be our last question. Does Sterling have any performance guarantees and warranties associated with the battery system? And are these limited to repair and replace, or are there any hard liquidated damages for failure to perform? For example, during the peak hour, if you were trying to discharge the battery and it didn't perform?
Yeah, yes to both. We have a insurance plan with them, an energy assurance plan with NEC. We also have a operation and maintenance agreement with them for the next 4 years. So yes, we have both of those in place.
And when you say them, you're talking about the battery vendor.
NEC, correct? Yeah, NEC Energy Systems. Yeah.
Right, and this is you are owning this.
We own this outright. We own this system outright, correct.
So you're talking about a performance warranty that the vendor provided as part of the package, and maybe you want to speak to that a little bit more, because I believe they oversized the system a little bit to make sure.
That's the next words out of my mouth. What we did, we went out to bid on the projects, and we looked for this thing to be 2 megawatts, 3 megawatt hours after 5 years. And to meet that, this degradation in the batteries, they bid a 3.9 megawatt unit.
So that after 10 years, even given expected degradation over time, they could still meet your criteria.
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
Given the parameters we gave them, we would operate them. There's a give and take there too, you know. So.
Sure. Well, you can't turn around and start running it into the ground every day and expect it to
exactly
hold up. Yep. Okay. Well, look, this has been a really fascinating presentation and a bunch of really good questions from the audience. I apologize we didn't get to all of them. We had well over, I think we had about more than 250 people in this webinar. Thanks very much to all our presenters. We had a really good webinar. I appreciate it. Any last words?
Nope, I think we're pretty good.
Okay. Thanks, Emery.
Well,
Thanks.
I have last words.
Oh, very good.
Have this project work so well. I think it's an example that we will see emulated by many other municipalities. And it's particularly suitable, I think, for the municipal level because you can have fast decisions, and you can put in the system, and you can reap the benefits. And so it's really proven out well, and I expect to see many more.
Yeah, actually, we are seeing more under development right now. So you're absolutely right. Okay, I think we need to end it as we've gone over our hour and a half. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.